We had over 1,500 people sign up for this webinar, so we tested and tested and tested and hope that we have a great system. We wanted to make sure you guys didn't have any trouble logging in, seeing us, hearing us. So we're gonna get started here in a few minutes. Yay! Oh, everybody's pouring in. This is awesome. Okay, so a couple of housekeeping notes. If you have a pen and paper, that will be great. Whitney's going to be going through a bunch of really good stuff, and you might want to take notes or, you know, write down some goals, all different stuff. So grab a pen and paper, maybe grab some coffee or a glass of wine, I don't know, wherever it is where you are, and get settled. We will start in just a second. Yay! Alicia from Texas, love it. We have just again, a little bit of housekeeping. We have a bunch of people from the data designer team that are here. They're going to be answering your questions. So if you have questions, put them in the chat box or private message us. We'll make sure we get either one of us will answer your question or we will do a Q&A with Whitney at the end of the webinar. So we want to make sure you get all your questions answered. So please let us know you're here. Say hello, which a lot of you are already doing. This is so fun and so exciting. Okay, yes. Awesome. Okay, well, I think we're going to get started. Once again, welcome to the webinar. I'm Emily from the Data Designer team. We're so happy to have you. We have been working on this for a couple of weeks, and we had over 1,500 people sign up because we know that this is a time that you are excited to be setting goals and getting ready for the new year. So in partnership with our friends at Blue Sky, we have Whitney English here, who's the founder of Data Designer, and I am going to pass it over to her.
Okay, you guys should be able to hear me now, hopefully. All this is working like we planned for it to work. Welcome. I'm excited to be here today with you guys. Thank you so much for taking time out of your week to join us. Like Emily said, all you need for this webinar is some paper, a pad of paper, and a pen. I want to encourage you to take lots of notes. I'm going to be asking you guys some questions to challenge you to think through what you want your 2018 to look like. We're going to be just workshopping some goals, some values, things like that. And I'm just really grateful that you're here. And again, Emily said if you have questions, just type them in the chat box. The team here has got an amazing system set up for getting me questions. So I'm just excited to be here with you guys today. So let me ask a question. A lot of you guys are saying where you're from, and we definitely have some international folks with us. So thank you for taking time out of your schedule to join us. How many of you guys have been on a webinar or a Facebook Live with us before, with me before, the Data Designer team before? How many of you guys have been here before? A question about are people getting sound and video? So hopefully we're good on that. A couple from Tulsa, Dallas, Texas, New York. First time. Okay, so we have there's just a few answers coming in, but we have a few people that are first timers and a few people who have joined us before. So welcome to everybody. Welcome, welcome, welcome. Today I want to talk to you about, I've got my notes. I have a little Data Designer notes book from the line that we have at Target. And I've also got good old classic pen and paper notes. And then I also have here my flagship Data Designer, which I'm going to be talking about right here. And just want to welcome you guys. Okay, so what are we going to talk about today? We're going to talk about getting ready for 2018. We're going to talk about priorities, goals, getting where we want to go. We're going to talk about personal development, hopefully throw out some time management tips for you guys, talk a little bit about self-care stuff. One thing that I want to encourage you guys to do is if you have a suggestion or a comment for each other, any ideas, anything that you're processing, you're workshopping through and you want to share that with the other people, just type that in the chat box because we would love to hear from you. Definitely the energy is super motivating to me, so I can imagine how motivating that is for you guys. So anything you think, just type it in the chat box. Okay, so to kick off, I wanted to give you a little background. Those of you who've never been on a webinar with me before, I don't know if you've ever heard my story before, so sometimes I talk about it. But about 7 years ago, I was looking at my goals and I realized that they were very singularly focused on my career. And I realized at the same time that my life was not going the direction I wanted to, that that I actually wasn't even achieving the business goals. And so I kept setting more business goals until just everything was like all about my career and my business, and it wasn't working. And it wasn't working, I realized through some research and introspection that it wasn't working because my goals were not aligned with who I was. They were not about where I wanted to go, and they weren't, they didn't take into account my strengths, what really mattered to me, my values. They were all about what other people wanted and what the world defined as success. So anytime in my career I've had a small amount of success, what I was doing at the time was I was saying, well, what does the world say is the next bar? Like, what do I need to go to get to the next level of success? And I ended up with goals that didn't have anything to do with my family. They didn't have anything to do with taking care of myself. They didn't have anything to do with my heart, my spirit, my personal development goals, or the part of the segment of my life that is personal development. And I made a choice to start scheduling my values first, which is something I'm going to talk about here in a little bit. We're going to workshop how that all looks so that you can take that same step starting today. And everything else started falling into place. When I scheduled my values first and my goals second, everything else in life started falling into place. And so that's what I want to walk you guys through today, was the process that I use. So I want you to feel free to get messy, take lots of notes. I didn't want to put together any worksheets for this because you're going to walk away with a lot of thoughts. I walk through this process myself every year, and this is what it looks like. It's just a bunch of words on unlined paper, and this is all I need to set goals for the year. I plug it into my day designer after I'm done getting messy on paper, but today is all about getting messy. So the first thing I want to talk to you about is those values. I mentioned schedule your values first. So you might be sitting there thinking, okay, great, Whitney, what are my values? So I want to talk about what that is. Does anybody have any thoughts? When I say the word values, like does anything come to mind? Like, what does that word mean to you? Does it confuse you? How are you feeling when I say that word values? Like, what are your values? What does that seem like to you? If I can ask that question. Things that are important to me. That's awesome. Yes, there we go. There's a definition. The first two people said, what is important to me? So we're going to move forward with that. Non-negotiable beliefs, love that. So on your notes, on your piece of paper, that's the first question I want to ask you is, what were your values in 2017? When you look back on your life, another thing that I think is great when we start talking about values is a lot of people pick a word for the year. That word for the year is a value. That is one of the things that you are deciding to focus on. That is one of the things that you are saying is important as part of your upcoming year. So that word of the year is a value. So if you had a word of the year for 2017, on the top of your piece of paper, the first question I am asking you is, what were your values for 2017? What was your word for the year for 2017? Write that at the top of your sheet of paper. So I did that. I'm going to share I ended up with 1 page of notes as I walked through this process. And so I'm going to share my values. My values for 2017 were faith, family, gratitude, creativity, and personal growth. I had 5. You can have a ton. For the purposes of this workshop, just pick 2 to 5. Another thing I want you, don't overthink any of this. All of this information is gonna point us to where we want to go. Brittany says she didn't have a word. That's okay. Another thing that I've learned after workshopping this way for 7 years is that every single year I do this, my answers get more and more tighter. more and more tighter, tighter, more and more succinct. Everything sort of starts to look the same year over year. But that's important because it means I'm being true to myself. That's really what all this is about. So think about some words for 2017. What mattered most to you in 2017? What did you choose to focus on in 2017? If you didn't have a word, just think about the things that you focused on. What took a large amount of your time in 2017? What were some emotions that you might have experienced? And so write 2 to 5 of those across the top of your piece of paper. We're going to use them again in a second. So here is where this is, I call this part of the workshop, the webinar, having an honest conversation with ourselves, because there are actually 2 types of values. There are the values that we say we have. So these are things that I would say this is the problem that I was having 7 years ago when I did this for the first time. I was saying that one of my values was family, but I was spending all of my time at work. And that is a classic case of me saying one thing is a value, but not living it out. So what I was saying was not in alignment with my actions, and that's the problem. And a lot of us have that. Sometimes it happens just because we're not being aware of our actions and what we're doing. And the second type of value we have is that it's the one that we're actually living out. It's the one that we are living out by our actions. So whenever I was saying that family was a value, but I was actually spending all my time at work, I was operating with a different value than what I really wanted to. I really wanted to operate with the value of family. I was operating with the value of work, and I was out of alignment. And that's the problem that we end up sometimes. So another example of this would be like if somebody picked the word diligence for, I'm pulling a word out of thin air, diligence for 2017. But sitting here today on this webinar, you might be reflecting back and thinking, man, I just didn't really apply diligence. It didn't show through in my actions. I said that was something I wanted to value, but I really didn't follow through on that. And this is just, I call this part of the webinar and the workshop, honest conversation with yourself. And there's actually a worksheet in the Day Designer. We call it the reality check worksheet. And here is, I think I'm reverse on this, so you probably can't, and that also might be very tiny because we've got the chat window going. But if you have a Day Designer, if you have a 2018 Day Designer, this worksheet is in there. If you don't have a 2018 Day Designer, no worries. I'm getting ready to ask you the questions that you can write down on a piece of paper so that you can basically workshop through the same thing with a piece of paper. So this is all about having an honest conversation. Alicia says she had a major health crisis in September. That is a classic case of just something that's out of your control, disrupting your ability to follow through on a value or a word or something you were trying to focus on for the year. And so those things happen. But because there's these 2 types of values, the kinds that we can verbally say we have and the kinds that our actions show, we end up with a problem. The problem is that it's easy to deceive ourselves, and the purpose of this worksheet and this workshop is to have this honest conversation. Here's what, and then what's at stake. So sometimes when I'm talking to people, I like to think about like, what's at stake? What's going to happen if I don't share this piece of information with you guys? And what's at stake is that if we are not true to our values and when we are setting our goals, is we won't get to where we want to go in life. So my next question for you guys, question number 2, is where do you want to be when you're 80? What is your vision for the 80-year-old version of you? And it doesn't have to be 80. I'm just throwing out 80 as an arbitrary number. But think about a future point in time in your life. Think about not 2018. I'm talking 5, 10, 20 years down the road. Think about where you want to be at the end of your life. Take a couple minutes to think about that. This is the second question I'm asking in the webinar. Scribble down the question on your paper, on your piece of paper. Where do you want to be when you're 80? And then what do you think about that? Like what is your vision of life when you're 80? So I want to hear what Want to hear your answer on that. The first question was, what would you say your values were in 2017? We were talking about how your word of the year is a value and what your values were in 2017. And the second question is, where do you want to be when you're 80 or at a future point in time in your life? So my 80-year-old vision, vision of me when I'm 80, or the future Whitney vision is, I imagine a table with my family, probably like in Tuscany or the south of France. I want some little white lights overhead. I've got lots of details about this vision in my head. I won't go into all that. But I want all my friends or my kids, my husband, I want us to be sitting around this table, and I want us to be having really good conversation. That's where I want to be when I'm 80. So write down, take a few minutes and scribble down your vision for that future point in time of your life. And the rubber kind of meets the road here, because, and what I've talked about with some of my friends recently, is there's where we want to be in the future, the 80-year-old version of us, and there are the things that we did this past year. If we're reflecting back on 2017, and we need to pull our goals out of the space in between those two things, the thing that we want to be, that vision, and the things that we did. And we need to figure out what we need to do next year in 2018 to get us to that 80-year-old version of ourselves, how we want it to look like. And a lot of times we just get derailed in life. You know, somebody said Hurricane Maria a second ago. I mean, it's been an awful year for natural disasters all across. Those things can derail us. But if we know where we want to get, if we are focused on that vision, we can continually go back to that vision and set goals based on where we are, based on what's happened. We know where we are, we know what's happened. By using the tools of reflection, which we're going to use a little bit more in this workshop, we can determine where we are, what we've done, and then we can decide what needs to happen next year, what needs to happen in 2018 to get us to that 80-year-old version of ourselves. So if you haven't yet, take a few minutes, scribble down that answer on paper, that where you want to be when you're 80 answer. And we're going to move forward. We're going to talk about values a little bit more for a second, and that honest conversation. There's another question. The next question, the third question I want to ask you guys in reflecting on 2017 was, how did you spend your time? And if you have a day designer, the questions I'm about to ask are going to be they're reflected in this reality check worksheet we have in the day designer. But how did you spend your time in 2018? The three major categories of how most of us spend our time are home, like how much time do we spend at home, work, the majority of us spend a large amount of time at work, and then play, like what did we spend doing fun stuff. Everybody's life is different though, so there are going to be additional segments that you're going to want to include. Those who did suffer through a natural disaster this year probably spent a lot of time dealing with that. People who have a loved one who requires care often spend a large amount of time doing that. People spend time in church, school, community activities. A lot of those things can take up a lot of people's time. But you could almost think about, like, on your piece of paper, if it helped you, you could draw a circle and you could just make a really quick pie chart. Again, don't overthink it. This is not about quantifying every single working minute. But if you were to make a pie chart, how much time would you say you spent at work out of a week? You know, was it 50% of your time? Was it more than that? If you quantified the number of hours in a day, you could also put sleep on your pie chart. I mean, obviously, that's a requirement for all humans. But think about how you spent your time in 2017. And then the next thing I want to ask you is part of the same question about how did you spend your time in 2017 is, how do you want to spend your time in 2018? What investments do you want to make in time to get you closer to that 80-year-old vision, that vision of the 80-year-old you? It's not an 80-year-old vision, it's a vision of an 80-year-old us. I need to clarify that. What can we do? What can you do in 2018 that will move you toward that vision? So I'm going to use myself as an example. My vision is going to be sitting at a table with little white lights and my family. And I don't have a table. I'm going to have to get a table. That might be a 2018 goal. Being kind of silly right there. If I need little white lights, maybe I need to go get little white lights. Maybe I need to make some strides in building stronger relationships with my children who are young right now, but I can't squeeze a relationship in with them when they are 18. Part of the relationship building that I have to do with my kids has to be an investment I make now, and that is time I can't get back. So think about that, and what needs to happen now at this point in time in all the questions I'm asking you is I would recommend pulling out a separate sheet of paper, just ripping it out. I'm just going to take a piece of paper right here. I'm going to rip it out, and I am going to use this separate sheet of paper to brainstorm goals. I'm going to call this my goals brainstorm sheet. You call it whatever you want. This is a piece of scratch paper, not fancy at all, right? And I'm going to, as we walk through more of this workshop, I would love for you guys to start sharing what you think based on some of these questions that I'm asking. What would be a potential good goal for you to set for 2018? And share it. Share what you think that goal might be. And I would love for you guys to start getting ideas from each other. So the question I just asked was, how did you spend your time in 2017? How do you want to spend your time in 2018? So does anybody have any ideas? It doesn't have to be a firm goal. By saying this or writing it down, you're not committing to it yet. You're simply brainstorming. Here's what I would think I would like to do. I love it. We have a few goals. I want to spend more time self-care. Somebody said CrossFit. Working out is definitely always a goal. I've got that on my list. I'm going to share it with you guys in a second. Be mindful of time. Oh, get out of comfort zone. Guys, these are so good. So I'm not going to read them all. I would love for you to keep reading through each other's goals. And as I move forward, keep sharing the goals. And we're going to talk more about that. I love this. Love it, love it, love it. The next question is the fourth question, and it's a doozy, total doozy. This might be where you end up with some homework. You might end up thinking about some things. Again, I want this webinar to be a lot of light bulb moments for you guys. So you might walk away with things that you feel like you need to do, things you need to research or discover about yourself. I walked through this with myself yesterday, spent all day doing it. Like I've said, I do this every year. And I definitely have some things that are on a homework list, not even a goal list. It's just things I need to go work on. So this next question, the doozy question, is how did you spend your money in 2017? And I'm not necessarily asking you to share that because I know financial decisions can be extremely personal. But one of the things that reflects our values in our life is how we spend our time and money. Those time and money are the two most precious and finite resources we have on the earth. And how we spend those things reflects what's important to us, reflects our values. It seems like it all got sucked into bills. I totally relate. So when you think about how you spent your money in 2017, you can also think, how did that reflect my values? So somebody said new house and travel. So when you think about this, and I do want you guys to think about this, if you're making a list of how you spent your money in 2017, let's use the example of a new house. Someone might buy a house. Why? The question is, why did you spend your money that way? So if you spent your money on a new house, maybe the reason you did that is because it was a sound financial decision. So what you value there is good stewardship or wise financial decisions or planning for retirement. Those things are actually values. They're actions that reflect the things that you value. Travel, I think travel, it's a huge indicator of the value of, I feel like a value of travel is like being present. I took 2 trips with my kids and I actually categorized those as self-care things for me. That's part of that building relationship of that vision that I want to have when I'm 80. And that's time I can't get back. So the the choice to spend money on travel reflects the value of family for me. And by choosing to travel and to spend money to travel, I am honoring my value of family. Does that make sense? Your values are so reflected in how you spend your money. So as you get off this webinar, which we're not going to yet, we've got there's a few more minutes, like at least another half hour. Think about how this is like homework level stuff. This might be something you want to sit down and reflect. I did a little bit of Googling. I was just kind of curious. What are the average American? I know we have some international folks, if y'all will forgive me, but I Googled what are the average expenses? Like what categories of expenses does the average American family spend money on? And I have a list here. So these are just things to think about. Think about how much money you spent. And then the next question to ask as you reflect on how much money you spent on these categories in 2017 is, what do you want those expenditures to look like in 2018? Average American family, again, these are the major categories. Shelter, it's like home, food, rent, things like that. You can think about, why did I spend the money? You know, if you pay rent, you can think, why is rent important? If you have a mortgage, like, why is mortgage important? Ask yourself why on these questions, because they're really going to reflect the values that you lived out in 2017, and they're going to help you recognize a disconnect for values that you might want to focus more on in 2018. Food, shelter. I said shelter, food, transportation. This is a huge one. You know, do you have a car? Do you only use public transportation, and why? A lot of people use public transportation because they are very concerned about the climate and the environment. Some people use, have cars because that's the only way they can get around in their community or their area. Utilities. We sat down this time last year and reflected on our utility expenditures. I include cable, Netflix, things like that in utilities. And we decided that the choice to have cable and Netflix was not reflecting our values, was not reflecting the fact that we wanted to build relationships with our kids. And so we canceled those two services, which is pretty crazy considering how much Americans love Netflix. Sort of along the same lines is entertainment, like movies, concerts, sporting events, things like that. Apparel, I was actually surprised to learn that the average American family spends more money on entertainment and experiences like movies, concerts, and sporting events than they do on apparel and clothing. I think that's so interesting. We are in a day and age where we are valuing an experience over the value of things, and I think that's a really good thing for us. Healthcare is another big expenditure for families, not just personal healthcare, but a lot of times as you start to potentially care for aging parents, that can be an expense. Charitable giving, Americans, according to my research, a lot of the average family does give. Savings, very important. This is something that my husband and I are focusing on right now. We paid off a bunch of my husband's debt this year, which is a personal thing I might talk about more in a second, but definitely being wise with our finances has been important in saving for the future. Education, you could think about how much you spend on education stuff, whether that's for yourself or your kid. That's been a big expense for us this year as well. Debt is an expense. I know I said savings, but this year, if I was to put a pie chart of our expenses down, paying off debt was a huge chunk of our expenses. Not fun. Also, in the category of not fun, we have Social Security, which just comes out of your paycheck. So a lot of times people don't think of it as an expense, but it actually is. It is something that you are spending money on. Taxes, also totally not fun, but I think for me, choosing to recognize that as an expense and acknowledging that it did come out of my paycheck is important to being a good financial steward, good steward of finances. And then funny, but on this list of spending categories that I Googled and found, they had the category of vices listed, which I just kind of had to laugh at, but it's a real thing. Vices, according to this little article that I found, consist of things like alcohol, tobacco, and the lottery. So I'm not much of a tobacco and lottery person, but I do love a good cocktail. So if I'm being a really good financial steward, I'm probably going to sit down and quantify, not just what I spent on food last year, but let's just make sure cocktails are in the budget. Let's just be honest with honest with ourselves. And this is where the honest part of this conversation comes in. So when we really look at our actions with almost like that third party perspective, and we can get really honest with ourselves about where we are, what our actions are, what we're actually doing, and then we can decide to change. And that is where the goal setting happens. Somebody says Starbucks. That might be a vice. Beer money envelope, genius. Michael's is totally a vice. I love it. Yeah, like we all sort of have those things. Cocktail budget, you're the real deal, Whitney. Thank you. Y'all are awesome. Okay, so that fourth question, I'll kind of recap the questions. TJ Maxx is the devil. These are the funniest answers. I love this. It's like everybody sort of knows what they have that gets them in trouble from a financial aspect of things. This is so good. Wine budget, LOL. So the 4 questions, I'll just recap them really quickly because I know we have people kind of jumping on and off. Number 1 was, what would you say your values were in 2017? What if you had a word of the year, what was it? Number 2 was, where do you want to be when you're 80? What's your vision for the end of your life? Number 3 was, how did I spend my time in 2017, and how do I want to spend my time in 2018? This is hysterical. I can't even read the answers. And then the 4th question was, how did I spend my money in 2017, and how do I want to spend it in 2018? And it sounds like from the answers that most of us would love to be a little bit more disciplined about our spending. And that is where we should have you guys should have sort of like a growing list of goals right here. If you haven't pulled out a separate piece of paper and brainstormed a few goals, start that right now. I will share with you, I did my goal brainstorm sheet yesterday. And the first goal brainstorm that I put down was, I want to set up Mint for our personal family finances. You guys know that little app? It's called Mint. I have a friend in finance, and he recommends it for personal finances. And so that's going to be one of my January projects, is sitting down with my husband's business bank account and all of our personal credit card, everything like that, statements, things like that, and plugging everything into that and then using it. People are recommending the YNAB, that you need a budget. I know that there are several others. I've heard a lot about You Need a Budget too. That's an app too as well, I think. So anyway, that's just, I will share more of my personal goals as I move on through these questions. But I wanted to take a minute to right now remind you to start brainstorming your goals. Read through. So maybe that you like this idea of using some kind of finance app. There are some great suggestions. Maybe a goal needs to simply be research finance apps. Pick one, try it. Don't overthink it. Just start using one. Maybe a goal needs to be to set a budget. Spend only a certain amount of money at Trader Joe's every month. Maybe you need to set some boundaries on your time. We talked a little bit about time and how we can spend our time in 2018. So think about your answers to those questions, and then when you hit something you don't like, when you give yourself that honest answer and you find something you want to change, go put that thing that you want to change, go turn it into a potential goal on your goal brainstorm sheet right here. So hopefully everything is, Natisa, or that might be Natasha, I don't know, boundaries on social media. That's good. I've done a little bit of that too this year. I might talk about that in a little bit. Okay, so my 5th question for you guys. And again, what we're doing is we're using the tool of reflection to think about, what did we do in 2017 and what do we want to change for 2018? Because in that space, we're going to find some good goals that are going to get us to where we want to be when we're 80. So my 5th question is, what did you do for yourself in 2017? What did you do for you? I'm going to go through my papers because I wrote some answers down on this, and I always think it's helpful to kind of share some of my personal stuff. So one of the things I did for myself this year was like I said earlier, I took those 2 trips with my kids because right now building a relationship with them is super important. When they were really young, when my kids were really young, my daughter was born the month after we launched Day Designer. So I actually spent the first 4 years of her life in full-on entrepreneur mode. We had to. There was no option. I was working a ton, and I want to get that time back, and I can't get that time back. She is 5 now, and we got rid of our nanny. Let me think. Not got rid of her, but we set some goals. We made some choices. We made some decisions. And about 3 years ago, we our sweet nanny was actually my cousin, and we just kind of said, I need to spend more time. I wanted to spend more time with my kids, and so we made that choice to make it hard. Like it just make it harder for me to be able to get out of the house. And it was a decision that I have never regretted. I do not look back and regret it at all. I love these answers. What I did for myself in 2017, Whole30. Megan, you are such an inspiration to all of us. Started an at-home business, took one night just for me. Love it. Whether it was getting my nails done or grocery shopping alone. Oh, Sadrina, I hear ya. Started a blog with your best friend. That's amazing. Gave myself permission to spend time with people that are right and good for me and stop spending time with those who are negative. Rock on, Tara. Joined a tennis team. That's amazing, Michelle. Focused on your new relationship with your boyfriend. That's fun. That's a wonderful season. Taisha says, allowed myself to enjoy solitude and being single. So important. I think another potential, like on my brainstorm list, might be meditation for 2017. I have an amazing friend who leads our women's small group at church, and she actually told me that meditation helps you lose weight. All you need is 5 minutes a day. So I'm like, yes, I might need to do that. You guys, this is awesome. I love this. I love this. This is probably so inspiring because those of you who did stuff are really inspiring those of us who are trying to think about what we want to do for 2018. This is so cool. So that's my next question is what can you do for yourself next year? So I think these answers are great. My answer to myself on what I want to do for myself next year, I put workout. I'm thinking 5K. I love running. I love a little Britney Spears Toxic when I'm running, which also just so happens to be on the Pitch Perfect 3 soundtrack. Way off topic. Back to goal setting. But I really know I did several of, like those of you who might have been at Go Wild 2 years ago, I talked about this whole like vegan thing I was on. And I felt so good, guys. I would love to get back to that. It's going to take some intention. It's going to take some planning on my part. It's going to take some meal planning. Going to have to plan meals for kids, husband, and myself. But with a little dedication, I know I can do that. And it's something that I for sure can do for myself. Sarah agrees with Brittany and running. I'm so good, right? Yeah, I mean, we're mostly female on here, I think, so I would just like to take a moment to endorse Pitch Perfect 3. End of that topic of conversation. Okay, next on my notes. Next question. Question number 6. I love this, you guys. You're getting so many good ideas from each other. Question number 6 is, how did you live out your word of the year? So a second ago, you guys were all talking about what your word of the year was. A few of you said you didn't have a word of the year. Totally fine. You don't have to. I do the values thing. I pick 5 values to focus on. This year I've only picked 4. I'll share those in a little bit if you guys are interested. But how did you live that out? So my values for 2017, and again I'll share from personal experience, were faith, family, gratitude, creativity, and personal growth. And I can kind of go down that list and say, what did I do in each of those categories? Or did I? Did I pursue the value of creativity? Did I pursue the value of personal growth? Do I need to do anything for any of those things in 2018? Which is sort of the next question. I guess you could tie these together. I have them as questions 6 and 7. Question 6 was, how did you live out your values or your word of the year in 2017? How did you live out your values or your word of the year in 2018? Somebody said, Nora says, I totally failed on my word last year. And I would just love to encourage anybody else who's feeling like that. Failure is okay. Failure is awesome. Failure gets us to where we want to go. Realizing that we failed on something is part of that honest conversation. And a really important part of that is not beating ourselves up and not allowing us to fall into negative self-talk about the things that we have failed on. I don't even have that in my notes to talk to you guys about, but I think that's so important to mention. When we're doing this reflection stuff, it's probably pretty easy to get discouraged and think, oh, I didn't do that right, or I didn't do this right. And when we start to think those things, instead of beating ourselves up and being like, dang it, Whitney, you should have done better about that, we need to remind ourselves, and this is me saying this to you, you did the best you can in 2017, and you are going to do better in 2018. And if you feel like you failed at anything in 2017, I want you to get off this webinar as soon as it's over and look in the mirror and say that to yourself. You did the best you could in 2017, and you're going to do better in 2018. But like recognizing and acknowledging and thanking yourself, thanking that part, that human, that heart inside of you that we so quickly turn off and just talk down to. Just remind yourself to thank yourself for the work that you have done, because you are in a different spot this year than you were last year. You made progress, and you're going to make more progress in 2018. So not to get too sappy on you, but the mirror talk does work. That is something that I do, and I want to encourage you guys on that right now, if I can. Okay, so moving right on. Question 7. Question 7 was, what do I want my values for 2018 to be? So I talked a little bit about picking a word for the year. You can do that. You can pick one word for the year if you want to. You can pick a series of words. A value is anything that you want to focus on, any word that represents a focus that you want to have for 2018. This is important because this has been a light bulb moment for us this year. My husband was listening to a podcast, I think. He got off the podcast and he was like, I need to schedule my values first and everything else second. And I was like, yes, honey, that's what I've been saying for 7 years. Good job. But it was a real light bulb moment for me too, because it just sort of said in a very succinct way something that I feel like I've been acting on that has helped the rest of my life fall into place. And that is schedule your values first and everything else second. So everything else is goals. So we've talked about values. We have a list of brainstormed goals, and now I want to take a few minutes and talk about the goal setting system that I used. And I talked about this at Go Wild. I've talked about this on my blog, my personal blog before. But about the same time that I was realizing that I wasn't living according to the values that I said I was living toward, living for, I had that really brutal, honest conversation with myself about 7 years ago. I started realizing that SMART goals didn't work for me. And if you've been in any type of probably corporate goal setting workshop, they probably talk to you about SMART goals. Have you guys heard about those before? Are we on the same page? You've heard about SMART goals? There's a whole Wikipedia article about SMART goals if you want to Google it. But for the purposes of this webinar, I just want to tell you the story. They just didn't work for me. And I started realizing, like I was saying earlier, that all my goals were business and career related. And I started realizing that the problem was my goals were not balanced. So they were not in alignment with my values, and they weren't balanced. And one of my goals for you in this workshop is that you will leave here with balanced and aligned goals, goals that align with your core, with goals that align with what matters to you, what's most important to you, and then goals that are balanced across all areas of your life. And I came up with this acronym of HEART, and I did some research on how do you live a balanced life, which really, just a note of encouragement on that. It's never really possible to be completely balanced. I mean, part of the balance thing, if you're riding a bicycle, is that you're actually sort of always out of balance. You're actually sort of always one way or the other. You're never actually truly consistently all the time straight. So part of what keeps us in balance is this little flow. You know what I'm saying? You with me there? So I realized that I was never going to really reach true balance, that I could let go of the perfectionist desire to really achieve perfect balance in life, and decided that I would try to just balance my goals and set goals that were balanced across 5 specific areas and categories. So I'm going to walk you through what those categories are, and it uses the acronym of HEART. So instead of SMART goals, I use HEART goals, and I'll just dive right in. The H under HEART stands for help yourself. So the first acronym is help yourself, H, help yourself. And the principle behind this is self-care, and the idea that if we don't take care of ourselves, we can't take care of our people. And so that's super important. The first acronym is H, help yourself. The second acronym is E. This stands for everyone else. The philosophy behind this is that people are so important. People are the most important things on the face of this earth, humans, and their hearts and their souls. And I want my life to reflect that I value everyone else, and especially my kids. So I kind of look at my E, my everyone else, as concentric circles. I've got, I have to take care of myself, that's my H, and then I have to take care of my people, my husband, my kids, and then after that, I've got work, and then community relationships, church relationships, really important. So help yourself first, then everyone else next. The third letter in the HEART acronym, of course, is A, and that the word for that is attitude and academics. And this is important, or you can say academics and attitude. This is important because so many of us are students. There are so many people who are like just on the face of this earth that are in high school or college or grad school. And those of us who aren't enrolled in like an actual technical schooling program need to always be learning and growing, and prioritizing this in our lives is one of the things that helps keep us balanced. It's always learning and always growing. So it's a little bit about personal development. So we have H, help yourself, E, everyone else, A is attitude and academics. The R, and the order of these is important. R is the fourth one. The R stands for resources. So this is your finances and your time. And we talked a little bit about that earlier. And it's really easy to jump straight to finances when we are setting goals, when in reality, all of us know deep in our hearts that is not the most important thing. What the most important thing is taking care of ourselves so we can take care of other people. And when we set our goals all around the spirit of finances, we are neglecting an important part of ourselves and the people that are most important to us. So that is why R for resources is fourth in the HEART acronym. And the very, 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 very last letter in the acronym is T, and that stands for trade. That is your career or your business or your work, whatever you're doing. And the reason that is last is because the world just wants us to constantly raise that bar on success, when so many times we just need to stop and realize, no, we have succeeded. We have done a good job. We can stop. We can rest. We can focus on self-care. We can focus on the things that make us a better human, because getting to the next rung on the success ladder doesn't make us a better human. It just makes a human that's done more. And I don't know about you, but I want to be a human who hasn't just done more. I want to be a human that helps people do more with their lives, if that makes any sense. So HEART. So that's the acronym that I use to schedule my goals, and I'm going to walk you through how I do that right here. Tamika, resources would be your time and mostly your finances. I I look at resources in my life as time, money, and energy. I manage my energy under the H, help myself category, and a little bit of that A, that academic category, that attitude and academic category. And resources typically tends to be like financial goals. But I use that acronym because not only does it help me spread my goals out across an even number of evenly across a variety of segments, it also helps me prioritize. It also helps me realize that the H stuff has to go first when it comes down to putting these things in my calendar. So I'm going to talk to you about how I use that acronym to select my goals for the year. And then I'm going to talk to you about how to plug them into your planner. And then I'm going to answer questions that anybody might have. You should have a goal brainstorm sheet. I kind of tore one out to show you what it could look like, but I have mine here. While I was going through those questions, those 7 questions I challenged you guys to think through, hopefully you wrote those down and you can look through them later. Hopefully you've gotten a lot of ideas from everybody else on the webinar. Everybody should sort of have like a goal brainstorm sheet. And again, this is something that you can work on after this webinar. And so my personal goals, I'll read them to you. Were the Mint app, work out more, pick out some kind of plan for that, read chapter books. That's to my kids. Reading is really important. I want to spend some time on my spiritual life, so I put the word abide down here. That's a really important word to me. I wrote down pursue new ventures with diligence, host events for neighbors in my community, work towards guest spaces in our home. We would like to be able to host more people in our home. We live in a rural area, so having comfortable guest spaces is very important to me and helps me. That helps me. Hang on, I know what I'm about to say, but I'm actually going to save it here and say it in a second. I want to work to manage my energy and be responsible with my finances, which goes sort of back to that Mint app. I put down that I want to work smarter, not harder. I want to help others. We found out about a family in our community, an elderly couple that is struggling with some health concerns, and they need food on a regular basis. And so I'm going to try to always put a little casserole in the freezer for them whenever I'm cooking for my family. And that's on our goal list as a family as well. This year, my husband and I decided to sponsor a child through Compassion International. And so I want to connect with her through writing letters. And then something that I've been working through a little bit, we moved this summer. It's been a long ordeal, but this summer I kept using the words minimize and eliminate. And so I wrote that down as part of a potential goal for my 2017. So what I did here, and this is, you might want to use your scratch paper, might want to get a new piece, but am I backwards on this? I might be backwards. I just took a little bit of space. So you could use like a whole sheet of paper and divide it into 5 categories, but I just made one category for H, for my help yourself, one category for E, my everyone else, one category for A, my attitude and academics, one category for R, my resources, and then one category for T, my trade or business or career goals. And then what I did was I took each of my goals up here at the top and I plugged them in to each of these categories. Whoops, I'm off screen. Plugged them in. So I took each one of these things and just really briefly I wrote out. So I basically took the goals from my goal brainstorm list and I categorized each of the goals by H, E, A, R, or T. Lynette, the attitude in academics is it's about personal growth and personal development, things that you want to learn, things that could be books you want to read, something like a craft you want to try, just something that you, it relates to self-care, except that self-care more has to do with necessity, and the A has to do more with it's not necessarily things that make us better. It's just it does make us better, but it's not necessity type things. Like under H, help myself, I need to put together a workout program for myself, because that is going to help me achieve my vision of where I am when I'm 80. But under A, I might have take a pottery class, just for something to learn and grow. April asked a great question. What if you don't have a trade? That's a great question. I think the majority of us all have something. If it's not an actual business that's bringing in a paycheck, it might be for someone who is strictly a stay-at-home mom, it might just be maintaining a home, to be totally honest. There's like zero shame in that. Also, you don't have to have a goal for that category. Now that you have so directly asked that question, I'm sitting here thinking through, I'm like, so cool. Yeah, Hazel, A could be anything that you want to do. Meredith says that she's a stay-at-home mom and she's going to think of trade as areas where I can give my time, volunteer work. That is awesome, Meredith. That's great. That's really, really beautiful. Okay, so Leanne says the T could also represent talents, which we all have and are responsible for, whether through work, business, or volunteer work. That is so solid, Leanne. Love that. You guys are brilliant. I love you guys. This is why I love doing this. Okay, so here's my next step for you guys. I put a limit on the number of goals that I am allowed to have in each category. That is part of what helps my goals stay balanced. So 3 goals for heart, 3 goals for H, for help myself, 3 goals for E, everyone else, 3 goals for A, attitude and academics, 3 goals for R, my resources, and 3 goals for T. So that is, this goes back to the story I told at the beginning about how I realized that all of my goals fell toward that business and career angle of things. I had like 30 goals and they were all business related. And I realized that my goals were out of balance and they weren't in alignment with the gifts that I'd been given, and that I needed to pick goals for each area and spread them out. That's 15 goals. That's a lot of goals. 15 times 5, or 3 times 5 is 50. Yeah, that's a lot of goals. I used to even allow myself 3 wild card goals, is what I called them. And it was too much. What would declutter fall into? I think, Bridget, that's a great question. When you have goals and you wonder what category they fall into, think about what they're going to do for you. Is decluttering going to help you be a better person for your family? And if that is, it might go under help yourself. If declutter is going to help you, like I feel like my husband and I need to declutter our finances right now. So I would put that goal under R for the stewardship angle of things. But that's a great question, because the goals can go under whatever works for you. The HEART acronym is a way to help you recognize where you might be cattywampus on goals. Cattywampus is the word we use here in the South a lot. But it's not like you have to. You're also allowed to have 2 goals under H, help yourself, and you don't have to have 3 goals in each category. You can have 2. You could have 1. The important thing is not to end up with tons of lopsided goals. Brittany says, ladies, there is no wrong way to do this, and that is so correct. The HEART acronym helps me also, not just from a yearly standpoint, looking at my goals from a yearly perspective, but I also will think about it from a monthly and a weekly and a daily standpoint. What do I need to do this month that falls under each of these categories? I'll wake up in the morning and think, what do I need to do today? What's one thing I can do for H, one thing I can do for E, so on and so forth. But the goal about HEART is all about balance, whether you're looking at that from a yearly standpoint or from you could use it to look at your, the idea of your whole life if you wanted to. Carrie says everyone may have the same goals. It's a different focus. Doesn't make it wrong. And that is so true. So just be encouraged. There is no wrong way to do it. So let's say now you might feel like you've got some homework to do when we jump off this webinar. which is totally awesome. I prepared for that. I said you might feel like that at the beginning of the webinar. The last little task that I would ask you to add to your notes is that when you have your goals selected, whether that's 12 goals or 15 goals, but balanced goals, the idea would be to not end up with goals lopsided in different categories. Look at each of those goals, and this is where you might take a notebook like this, and you could write one of the goals at the top of the piece of paper, and then ask yourself 3 questions for each goal. What do I need to do on a monthly basis to achieve this goal? What do I need to do on a weekly basis to achieve this goal? And what do I need to do on a daily basis to achieve this goal? And for each goal, you will not necessarily have an answer for each of those 3 areas. Some goals do not require you to do daily things. Some goals do not require you to do monthly things. But asking yourself those 3 questions for each goal is going to help you schedule those goals. And that would be where we are trying to go with this webinar, is how do you schedule your goals? There's also, if you do have a day designer or are thinking about getting one, there is a worksheet for planning out your goals. There's a spot here for 10 goals, and you can describe the goal in the first column and write down any monthly actions needed for that, any weekly actions, any daily actions. And then there's a category for you to write what progress looks like. And this helps you throughout the year. If you turn back to this page and look at this, you can just say, I said I was going to work out more in 2018, and working out more than I'm working out now means that looks like going for a walk once a week. And so you can just kind of look back at this column and go, am I making progress on that? Am I going for a walk once a week? But this can just act as a reference page. And then once you have that, and again, this is a messy process. It is hard to organize, because I feel like if you're like me, you actually end up with paper everywhere. I mean, if you could see this, like all this is going to go in the trash, but just papers everywhere. And what I will end up with when I'm finished with this process is a list of things that I need to plug into my planner. And these are non-negotiables. Carolyn says, can I repeat the questions? The 3 questions are, look at every goal and ask yourself, what do I need to do on a monthly, weekly, and daily basis to achieve these goals? And then plug those into your planner. I don't know if you guys have heard this analogy before, but I'll share it in conclusion before I jump to a Q&A. But I think it was maybe Stephen Covey who said the first time, if you have a jar and you've got sand and water and pebbles and big rocks, if you put the sand in first, and then you put the pebbles in, and then you put the rocks in, everything's going to overflow out of that jar. But if I've got that jar and I put the big rocks in first, big rocks are non-negotiable things in our schedule, and then I sprinkle the pebbles in to kind of fill around the big rocks, and then I put the sand in on top of that, then I can actually pour water in the jar on top of that. So I'm putting so much more in the jar by taking those non-negotiable big rocks and using them to anchor my life, or using them to anchor my schedule. And so these goals need to become for us, they're so important. We have used a process here, looking at the big picture of our lives and where we want to be, and we've used that to help determine what we want our goals to be for 2018. And when we plug the actions that help us achieve those goals into our calendar, we will end up using the year of 2018 to move us closer to that vision of how we want our life to look like when we're 80. That's my in conclusion. That's it. When you ask yourself those 3 questions, what do I need to do on a monthly basis, daily basis, and weekly basis to achieve this goal? And you don't end up with a huge long list for each goal, or at least I haven't whenever I do this. Normally I end up with 1 or 2 things I need to either do on a monthly basis or weekly basis that are going to help move me toward that goal, some sort of next step type things. And it also helps to do this, throughout the year, to reflect on, like, what are my next steps and my goals need to be. Like, let's do a check-in on this, personal check-in. But when I plug those things in my calendar, you can use a pencil if you're worried about things changing and you want to erase it. But I wholeheartedly believe in the act of writing things down. I think there is, you could call it magic. You could call it, you can call it science. They have actually proven that when you write things down, not type them out, but when you write things down, I mean, notice my notes are all handwritten for this. But when you write things down, you are pulling those things out of the forefront of your brain. You're putting them on paper, but you're also tucking them back into your subconscious, and you're freeing up brain space to let you, to actually help you go and accomplish those goals. So even if you just write this stuff down in your planner and you walk away from it and it's July and you flip over and you're like, oh, I was supposed to be here right now. I'd bet you $10 you'll look at it and be like, oh, I did that without even realizing it. So definitely write stuff down. If you have a day designer, use your day designer to write it down. If you have a different planner, still plug this stuff in. You can even just get go to Target and get a little notes thing and you could write this stuff down in there. But write it down, make it happen. Okay. Questions? Any type of any Q&A? Any type of questions? I meant to share more of my personal story in there, and I just got going and completely realized I didn't. So I'm happy to answer any questions anybody has. My spiritual goal that I shared, I used the word abide. I realized a few years ago that I was not a few years ago, that's been like a past year thing, but abide. I actually put on my personal goal, abide in God's word. I just want to, be in that more. Which that's going to look different for everybody, but my word for the spiritual is abide. Where do you start if you feel overwhelmed with this? Just start by writing it down. Just start writing. Start writing. You could start with the heart thing if you want to, if you just that kind of cuts straight to the chase, that kind of cuts out the values angle of things, which helps some people but can overwhelm other people. But just start with that, how can I help myself? How can I help everyone else? How do I deal with procrastination? I force myself to do a goal check-in, things like that. Can we schedule a quarterly review? Let me talk to the team. Question 7 was, would I consider enlarging my planners? Hang on, I think I lost some questions. I have something to tell you about enlarging the planners, actually, a very important thing. I meant to weave it into my story and it totally, I totally lost it. Question 7 was, what do I want my values for 2018 to be, and what does living those out look like? I need to tell you another part of my story. What happens when you set these goals, but your hubby is not a goal setter? That is the story of my life. He just lets me set the goals. How do I manage my social media time, considering your work uses it? That I need to tell you that part of my story too. So I'm gonna tell you another little bit of the story, and then I'm gonna answer some more questions in a second. Michelle says, great question. I'm not sure what the question was, or maybe I did answer it. Okay. So in setting your goals, something that I realized a few years ago was that the idea of spending more time with my kids was something that I felt like I was missing out on. When I talked about having a nanny, I really felt like I was missing out on that time with my kids. And about the same time, Blue Sky came to me and asked if they could license the day designer name to put the products into Target. And we started down this road of partnership. And it has been absolutely awesome. And after that year, I did another round of goal setting, and I realized that I needed to still make more strides in working less and spending more time with my kids. And about that point in time, Blue Sky came to me and said, what if we partnered a little bit more? They were pros in production, pros in things like that. So they have actually, we have actually fully, officially merged, combined. They have acquired Day Designer. and they're helping us do all this production, things like that. They have stepped in and helped me with the team aspect of things and delegating stuff to answer that question about how do I manage social media time. I am big on delegating, and the Blue Sky team has been an amazing help with that. So that is a shift in my life that sort of echoes back to the goal setting things. It didn't happen overnight. It was definitely a goal on my list for a couple of years before we were actually fully able to make that happen. So I wanted to announce that. That was actually supposed to be part of the webinar, and I got to the end of it and realized I hadn't even talked about that, which is awesome because that's like how synergistic it's totally been. What suggestions do I have in setting realistic goals? So much enthusiasm only to get frustrated. That's a great question, Jenna. Oh, it's Jenna. I think that's, yeah. I sometimes, if I start to feel like I'm frustrated in my goal setting, I only set goals that I know I can achieve, which feels a little bit lazy, but it gets me to the bigger goals, is what I've learned. So if like right now, like the goal I have on my list is work out more, but that's pretty broad. I do need to get more specific and on that. So I might just start with, I'd like to eventually end up running by the end of the year. So the small goal might be like start going for a walk once a week or start doing some sprints or things like that. But I can commit to that. I know I can achieve that. So I'll set that goal and plug that in the calendar as sort of one of the big rocks for January. And then I can sort of up that. If I've done that, I know I can move on. So sometimes the goals actually just need to be the baby steps. Examples of word for the year. I was going to mention that earlier. I have 4 words on my values list for 2018. Right now my words are education because that's very important in our house. We're homeschooling, and it's been an amazing opportunity for me to learn more. It's crazy how I feel like I'm re-educating myself sometimes. Fruitful. I want to be fruitful with my time, my ventures. I want to use my time wisely. I want to be gracious, both in hosting people and in our community, and just really reflect. I want people to be like, man, she is so gracious. That's something I want to work on. And then wise is another word. I want to be diligent with my stewardship, my finances, and my time. Let's see, more questions. Thanks for the congratulations. Thanks. How do I bring others on board to support me in achieving my goals? What do I do if I don't have that support? I would love to throw that question out to the group and ask you guys that. I tend to be a pretty independent person, and I don't. I try to set goals that don't require other people to. I don't talk about them a lot either. I don't. I did go to my husband. One of our goals this year is to help make meals for this elderly couple I mentioned. And I do need his help to get on board with that. But I just went to him and I just said, I have this family goal. I really feel like we need to help these people. And he's a soft heart, so he's like totally on board. And he's not much of a goal setter, so I'll kind of have to ease him into that. And it'll start with like some grocery list or some reminders to maybe help me cook a meal on a certain night. Our first step on that is we're going to look on Amazon and try to find some of those disposable foil pans. So that's another example of like starting really small on a goal. I don't have this big meal plan thing planned out yet. Sometimes that can feel overwhelming, but like a first next step in achieving that goal would be to like source some foil pans. And Amazon's great because you just one click order. It's dangerous but wonderful at the same time, and we'll start to get going on that. So that's how I sort of achieve that. Tori says, will the quality change? No, nothing is changing. So nothing. Like the team's the same. It's nothing has changed. It actually happened a while back. So it's been sort of a very seamless transition. Any suggestions on how to incorporate work goals when you're not revved up for work? yeah, that's where I feel like the whole attitude and academics thing comes in. I feel like that's important because it just for me, it reminds me that I am in charge of my brain, and I can tell my brain what it is excited about. And if there's something that I'm not excited about, I just start changing my attitude about it. I start saying thank you, opportunity, just to myself in my head, like being grateful for the opportunity that I have to work, the blessing that that is to help provide for my family. And yeah, that's how I do that. Kind of goes back to the gratitude thing, which is part of the day designer, like the daily gratitude thing. It's hard at first. Anytime there's anything in life that I'm not grateful for, it's hard at first. It's like through gritted teeth, I write it down, but kind of the second I change my attitude about it, everything changes. So that helps. Um, let's see what else. I'm believing more and more that if you take care of yourself and your family, the universe will reward you. Perfect example, Whitney, how you got rid of the nanny, taking care of your kids. And now Blue Sky brought the partnership into your life. Yeah, it's great. They have been amazing to work with, and are just they've really helped. It is. Like, thank you, Susan, for saying that. But I mean, I use that as an example to explain that when you set big goals, sometimes they don't happen right away. But when you do make decisions based on your values, they're kind of quality of life decisions. Everything else starts to fall into place. Somebody asked a question about social media, and that also has been something that has been odd for me. I just have more and more felt like social media isn't necessarily great for me and my family. I can be kind of a private person, and having my personal Instagram way out there feels a bit awkward at times. It just doesn't feel comfortable for me. But I think that you can look at things like that don't feel right in your life. You can set goals to say, I want to reduce the amount of time I'm on social media without altering the course of my business. You can't, go out there and do that overnight, but you definitely work towards it in small ways. And part of making that stuff happen is just starting to write stuff down. Let's see what else. Turned 31 in August, got my first apartment, big goal for a year. That is awesome. That is awesome, Natalie. Just keep towards that. Write down those big dreams. Write down that vision of your 80-year self, 80-year-old self, where you want to be for there, and little by little start to make goals that work you toward that. Do I plan work and personal in the same planner or use two separate? I do. The flagship day designer, when I'm busy, is always plenty. I always have plenty of space to use the task list to write down a column. If I'm having a slow month, I'll switch to one of the day designers that's a vertical weekly. They sold in Target last year, and the monthly planner layout is pretty much what I use on that. Monica says, neither do I discuss goals, pessimism, and runs in my family. They actually did a study a couple years ago that showed that if you told people your goals, you were less likely to achieve them. Because when you tell people your goal, people are well-meaning, and they very often say like, oh, good for you, like that's a great goal. But what happens in our brain when we do that is we end up getting this endorphin release that we need to like kind of like if you finish a marathon, which I've never done, let's just be honest about that right now, but like there's going to be a rush of like I did it, and you get that sort of like I did it rush when people congratulate you on setting your goals. And so there's actually an interesting study that says like you tell one or two people about the goals, they have to be people who who understand like they don't cheer you on. So a lot of my goals I keep to myself, and I don't really feel the need to share them. So yeah. Let's see what else. People are talking about planners. How do I hold myself accountable to my goals in my planner? Yeah, I mean, it's just, and I think that's the whole thing about scheduling the big rocks first, is you turn the page and it's there. It just kind of reminds you. I also just hardcore believe in writing stuff down. I find that when I write it down, I don't work as hard to achieve it. I know that sounds weird and kind of hocus pocus, but writing it down in its own way makes it happen. I have learned from experience. So you can write it down, rip it up, and throw it away. People are talking about color coding. I think that's super helpful. That was actually in my notes to share with you guys. A lot of times I do work stuff in one color and then personal stuff in another. And that is good for helping me reflect on that time question I said, like how much time do you spend on stuff? So that's been helpful on that. What else? Any other major questions? There's so many. Please repeat the name of the program that you were on that helped you feel so much better. Yes, I ate vegan for 3 months a couple years ago. Just vegan, gluten-free. And it was hard, but it was good. It was so good. How much time do you think you need to achieve specific goals or language exercise? I think it's different for everybody. And that's where start maybe just focus. Like if you want to learn a new language, you know, there's an app called Duolingo that I have used for practicing Spanish. And so if you want to learn a language, like just start with something, you know, as small as like, I'm going to download an app, or I'm going to go to the library and research this, or I'm going to just one thing to help you achieve the big goal instead of like planning out the whole goal. And I feel like those first tiny steps toward achieving the goals sometimes just set into motion and momentum, everything else falling into place. I love Minimalist Baker. She's a sweetheart. I met her one time. I was super tired when I met her, and she looked at me. She's like, "Are you okay?" I'm like, "I'm fine. I'm just exhausted." So it's probably all she remembers about me, but she's awesome. Okay. Oh, the comments just went away. I think that might be it. Are we done? I'm full screen. Okay. It's time to wrap up. There's an all caps goal. If you don't share your goals, how do you explain where your time is going when it's away from people who are used to it? I tend to be a pretty independent person and don't really feel like I need to justify my time to everybody. I totally would love to find out more about where that question came from over coffee if I could. Zombies couch to 5K is so fun. Okay. Explain energy and resources, please. So, I mean, and energy is a great example of one of those things that can fall into any of the categories. That might be help yourself. For me this year, managing my energy is important. So that is going to be under the help myself category. For some people, it's more of a habit and not something that requires a lot of focus. So they might put it under R for resources. Just whatever works for you. Okay, I am going to wrap up. Thank you guys for joining me. This is a lot of information. So I thank you guys for sticking with me. It was probably like drinking from a fire hydrant several points in time in the conversation. Thank you so much for joining us. I'm so excited to see where y'all go with this. Thanks for the ideas and the suggestions and your support. I'm ever so grateful for you, and so glad you enjoyed it. So I'm going to sign off. If my team lets me do that, they have the ability to do it. So thank you guys so much. We will see you around.